Have you made a quilt and it looks fine until you come to add the borders and then something's just not quite right? That's what happened to this quilt. The borders seem too long. And the real issue is those stretchy bias cut edges. If you're a beginner, this can trip you up, but it's easy to fix if you know how, and I'll show you that in this video. I divided my quilt into two halves here, this border. So I'm going to try and hold this in a way where you can see what's going on. I'm holding the border, this is the border, taut, but the quilt I'm trying to pin it to is dangling down because it looks much larger. This is to do with cutting on the cross of the fabric or not on the grain. So I think that's a little bit difficult to see, that this is actually seems much too big. So I've pinned my centre here and I've pinned my edge. And when I hold this out, that's when I get that bowing of the underneath, because the underneath is longer than the top. So what happens is, if I just pin this along here like I normally would, and I'm being really careful not to stretch the back out, doing really gentle handling of this fabric because I already know how much it's going to stretch. When I get to my centre, do you see there that I've got all this fabric left over where there would be a big fold? And so that's a good inch really of too much fabric that I don't want, and that's just on half of it. There's the other half to do, and because I divided it in two halves, there'll be as much on the other side, and that's because the back is stretchy. So I'm going to show you how to fix that problem. And so you've got all this fabric to deal with that isn't going to want to go into your quilt. There's a really easy way to do this, and I'm going to show you how to fix it. There are a couple of things though that you need to check first. So the first thing is just really obvious, and that is that you measured it correctly. You could pin that on there, find that, and it turns out that actually you've just not cut the right size. Let me just take this off for a minute, and then we'll put it back on in a minute. When you're measuring your quilt, you want to fold it in half. Make sure that you match these exactly. And then gently just smooth it out. Keep on matching this all the way along. If your cat sits on it, that interferes. Come on, Jess. There we go. Okay. So making sure that these edges are exactly matched. I'm going to move it up to where I can see the lines. And then just gently smooth this out. Now you're not trying to stretch it, you just want it to be totally smooth. And then along this other line, this is the fold, match that exactly to the edge line of your cutting board. So that's matched there exactly. Now, you're never ever going to measure it along the top or the bottom. You always want to measure it along the centre. So I'm going to measure about, I usually do about 1/3 and then 2/3 of the way down. So I'll measure across here and across here. And hopefully those measurements will be the same. So let's have a look. So that one is 26 3/4. And if I move that up a little bit, put it back on the line over here and measure it again. And again, that is exactly 26 3/4 inches. I'm not sure if you can see that. So now that you've got that measurement, that is the size that you're going to cut your borders, and you're going to cut two exactly the same size, because your aim is obviously to get the quilt to be square. And so I'm just going to, I don't know whether or not it'll show up when I do this, because it's all laying flat and just been folded. It may not look larger, but let's see. Well, it does look a little bit larger actually. If I measure it there, do you see it's actually about 27 1/4, so it looks ½ an inch bigger at the edges, but that's because this fabric all stretches really easily, and that is a problem with this kind of a quilt. And that's what I'm going to show you how to fix. Now my ironing board obviously is not long enough for the whole width of the quilt, so I'm going to do this half at a time. So what I'm going to do here is again match these edges, and I'm going to mark the exact centre of this quilt edge. Quite easy this one, because the block does join in the centre. And then let me just open that out. Now this is my border that I've cut at 26 3/4, and I'm going to mark the centre of that. Now you can't do this on a table, a smooth table, because the fabric underneath will just slide around. You want something that the fabric will just cling to a little bit, because that's what makes this work. Okay, so now I'm going to pin this border to the corner. And you can see I've already put the side borders on, and I didn't have any trouble with those. Didn't really seem too large like this one did when I first looked at it. And of course I've run into this problem before with these cross grain, because it's just the nature of the quilt. And now I'm pinning the centres together. Okay, now all we're going to do for the moment is deal with this half of the quilt. And again, not sure whether you can see or not how much that bows down on the underneath, because it's that much bigger. I feel like it just doesn't show up very well on camera what I'm saying. Alright, so now all I'm going to do is place this down like that. I've pinned the centre in place, and then over here this is the edge. And do you see how the underneath is pulling the edge up because it seems so much shorter? But it's not really shorter, it's just the stretchiness of the fabric that's causing a problem. So I'm going to sit this down. My ironing board's terrible, isn't it? I try never to show this on camera actually, and it's because I do a lot of applique. I always manage to burn my fusible onto my ironing board and onto my iron. Actually, that also has to be cleaned pretty often. So the next thing I'm going to do now is just pat on this underneath, and all that's doing is it's making it cling to the underneath, and somehow the stretchy edges stay the size they're supposed to be. You can match them up with the border and then just pat them all together. And now that's all, there's no folds under there, but it's all returned to the non-stretchy state that it should be in. I mean, that was really easy, wasn't it? And it's amazing that it does that. So let me get some pins. And I'm just going to go along now and pin this. I'm trying not to disturb it as much as possible now that I've got it where I want it. I need to make sure I'm pinning these seams the way I want them to go. And I would put quite a lot of pins in this. When you pick it up, those little pieces are going to try and stretch out again. So I'm going to put a lot of pins in there to make sure that doesn't happen. Okay, that's probably enough. So that's half of it done. And now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And then we'll take it to the sewing machine and sew it. Now the last thing I want to tell you about this process is you have to sew it with this side up, because the sewing machine will help to gather a little bit some of this extra fabric. Anytime you've got something that is where one side is a little bigger than the other or stretchy than the other, you always want that side to be on the underneath, because the teeth of the sewing machine help to move that under and you get a better result. So I'm just going to do a 1/4 inch seam and sew along this edge. And all the time, you know, I'm being really careful with this stretchy stuff not to pull on it. I'm just going to take my pins out as I go. Okay, I'm just going to press that open. So that top's on there now. Do you recognise this quilt? It's the same. I did a scrappy quilts video, and so I'm not showing this quilt because it's the same pattern as I already did. I do like it in this red, white, grey and black though. For some reason that colour combination always seems to work. So let me give you a close-up. This is the seam that we were dealing with. So I'm just going to run along it so that you can see there's no gathers or puckers or tucks or anything in there. So, and as I say, on the side seams, I didn't have to do any of that. They fitted on there perfectly well. So the big thing is, first of all, check your measurements. Measure down across the centre rather than at the edges. If it looks like it doesn't fit, just remeasure before you do anything else. If your measurements are correct, then go ahead and use this method to put it on. And I will tell you, there is one way to avoid doing all of this at all, and that is when you make this, if you watched my other video, you'll remember that I made all these squares on paper. And so I took the paper off when I sewed the blocks together, but you can actually leave the paper on all the time, so that even when you put these borders on, you could have the paper still on there. But I just find that, you know, just really a nuisance to take it off at that stage. I prefer to take it off much earlier, but, you know, if it's a struggle, if you're not confident about it, then you can leave it on if you want to. One last thing that I'll say about this is a lot of quilts these days, people don't put borders on anymore. I could have just gone straight on and put a binding on, so it would have looked kind of, you know, with a narrow edge like that. So do not do that with this quilt. That would not work on this quilt at all. And that is because you have to have some way of controlling this stretchy edge. You're always going to have a stretchy edge like this somewhere on a quilt like this that you have to deal with. And if you just go straight on and put binding on, you know, you're going to have one edge 4 inches bigger than another edge or something ridiculous. And it's going to look a real mess. It won't look square, it won't hang right, and you won't be happy with the result at all. So I hope this is useful and you get your borders on okay. So if you run into this problem, now you'll know what to do. It's quite common when things are on the diagonal like that. I hope this video solved your problem and you'll be able to do this, and thanks for watching.